Alrighty. Kia ora koutou. Welcome to 2023, the first of MyHR's webinars this year. Obviously, we'd hoped that it would be under different circumstances that we had our first webinar session, but thank you for joining us. I hope today is useful, and I hope today is a way to access some resources and some content that is going to be beneficial for you and your team, especially in the challenging times New Zealand currently finds itself. So a word about well-being. If you are feeling distressed or upset or concerned or worried, that's really normal at the moment. You're absolutely not alone. It's how a lot of us are feeling. So please call 1737 for free 24/7 support from a trained counsellor if you're feeling that way. And certainly at any time during this session, if what we talk about is a bit too much to deal with at the moment, you're very welcome to pop out and come back to the recording later. So we'll jump into some housekeeping. First thing is that the session will be recorded. So if you have an audio dropout or your internet isn't super reliable right now, you will be able to access the content later, so no stress. It also means that any questions that you ask in the discussion that we have will be publicly available. So if you do have questions you want to ask, you're very welcome to do so. Just make sure not to use any information you wouldn't want available publicly, or you can ask an anonymous question as well. In terms of questions, I'm planning on leaving quite a bit of time today for discussion, given it's an evolving, complicated situation, of course. So you're welcome to type your questions in the Q&A box as we go, or if you want to hold them to the end and ask them then, that's also totally fine. Just to let you know, I will be answering questions at the end because there's a bit of content for us to get through today. Last piece from me, this is an employment-focused discussion, so it's intended to be useful for people who are people managers or business owners or who look after staff. So if you have any questions or comments that aren't in that context, I may not answer them. I may come back to you later to direct you to the appropriate resources. But otherwise, yeah, please hit us up with your questions. We're here to help. So what we're going to be covering off today are topics and things to be mindful of as an employer in the wake of Cyclone Gabrielle. So Auckland, on Auckland anniversary weekend, 3 weeks ago now, feels like about 6 months, but 3 weeks ago, also experienced some flooding and some challenging weather conditions. So this content is likely to be doubly relevant for Aucklanders. But over the weekend that's just gone, of course, Cyclone Gabrielle has ravaged the country and particularly parts of the North Island. So we're hoping that this content will give you some direction and some answers to your immediate questions. And also just let you know that you're not alone. It's pretty stressful out there and a lot of us are going through difficult times with our homes or with not being able to reach out to loved ones and family, certainly having to manage what's going on for us as well as what's going on for our teams. So you're absolutely not alone, and hopefully this is a resource that will give you some guidance and some direction at the moment. So in terms of the topics we'll cover off today, we'll start with a bit of disaster management. So the first things to do in terms of responding to what's happened. We're obviously not coming to you live from the middle of the cyclone, so I'm sure many of you will be a few steps into that process, but we will just cover off some things to think about when you're responding to the crisis. We'll talk about managing your well-being and your team's well-being, because if all of us are curled in a corner having a bit of a breakdown, we can't be of help to anyone. So well-being is something we will touch on today. We'll go into your employment obligations and give you a bit of an overview of what does, but mostly what doesn't change when there is a crisis to be managed. So you know what your guide rails and parameters are for working within. And then we'll go into some specific scenarios. So where your business or your organization permanently can't open, so you're having to kind of lock the door and walk away, where you can't open temporarily, or there are some circumstances that you're managing, where your team can't come to work or won't come to work, how to manage those situations. And then we'll go into time for questions. So a couple of pieces for us to cover off, and hopefully that will provide you with some immediate content. But again, questions at the end if there's anything that I don't speak to or that you want to understand in more detail. So we'll kick off with the disaster management piece. So obviously we had quite a lot of warning last week. If you were paying attention to the news or the radio, or you were following the NEMA updates, that Cyclone Gabrielle was coming. There was pretty severe weather for 72 hours, and we're certainly just now starting to get a sense of the scope of what's happened, as well as the cost and kind of the extent of the damage. So first things first is to make sure that you and your household are safe. So if you've had to evacuate, if you had to leave your house for a period of time, or if you can't get back, make sure that you and the people in your household are taken care of. If there are loved ones or people who are vulnerable in your kind of sphere that you needed to reach out to, whether it's a neighbour who lives alone or if you've got elderly family, check in with them and make sure that they've got the food and water and shelter that they need as a matter of priority. So take care of yourself and your safety first is point number one. Once you've kind of done that, the next thing is to check in with your team. So in MyHR, if you're a MyHR client, we obviously store people's emergency contacts. So make sure that if you can't get a hold of your employees, that you can get a hold of, at least try their emergency contact and see if they can reach out. Whether that's over a text or an email or a call, whether you use Slack or WhatsApp, it kind of doesn't matter. Reaching out to your team to let them know that you're thinking about them, but also that you're checking that they're safe, particularly if people were at work or on site or in the office when the weather hit. Reaching out and making sure that they're safe and in safe locations is the first step. If you have EAP support available, so you have an employee assistance program, make sure you're sharing that information with your team and connecting them to it, because as we'll go into later, and hopefully it's obvious to everyone who has been looking out the window, this is pretty stressful and there's going to be a lot of distress and difficult feelings that come up, particularly given the 3 years of pandemic and other events that New Zealand has been dealing with. So if EAP support's available, direct your people to that as a matter of priority too. So once you know you're safe, once you've checked in with your team, the next thing to do is to assess your premises if you have an office or a factory or a site that you work from. So make sure it's safe to go into. If you're not sure, don't enter. Contact your insurer if there has been any damage, whether there's water leaking from the ceiling or windows have blown out or there's been physical damage to the building or to your car park or any of your signage. Get in touch with your insurer and start the process for getting some of that claimed back, or at least having that conversation. The next piece then is thinking about what team communications might need to go out to everyone. So do you need to say to everyone, the office is open, the roads in are fine, kind of we're open for business as usual? Do you need to reach out and say, look, the restaurant's been really badly flooded, we're not going to be able to open, I don't know what next steps are, but I will be in contact, and just for the moment know that you need to stay home and not come to work? You don't have to have all the answers in that first communication, but it is important to be fronting and letting your team know that you're on top of it and you're thinking about them, and at least you're working through a plan. Certainly as Aucklanders know, when our leadership is not there and not communicating, it adds to the stress of the situation. So make sure that you are being proactive and sending out communications. Even if there's no resolution, just let people know that you're working on it and that there will be more information to come as the situation becomes clearer. So we've done the immediate kind of response pieces. The next step is to look to manage your well-being kind of beyond, is your house safe? Are you safe? Is your family safe? The situation, again, I'll keep repeating, is incredibly stressful, and particularly when there have been several difficult years for New Zealand to manage. There'll be kind of chronic stress and fatigue that is coming up or is being triggered by what we're dealing with at the moment. So if you are having potentially a very alarming level of anger or frustration or sadness or grief or feeling a bit disconnected from everything, it may be because your body isn't just reacting to what's happening this weekend, it's reacting to what has happened over the last 3 years or 10 years. You know, we've all got stuff going on in our personal lives too, and it can wear our reserves and our resources down. So put on your own oxygen mask before you help anyone else. So the basics of your health and well-being, of course, are things like getting as much sleep as you can. So kind of 7 to 8 hours a night is the recommended amount. Fitting in naps if you can, if that's possible. Making sure you're eating well. So fresh fruit and vegetables, lots of protein, fat and carbohydrates and fiber as well. And staying connected with your loved ones where possible. That's obviously going to be a sensitive recommendation, given that there are parts of the country we still can't speak to, particularly on the East Coast. But where possible, check in with your friends, check in with your family, even just to say hi and that you hope they're doing okay and to see if there's anything that they need. But that connection with people in our whānau or in our tribe is really important for our well-being too. So the next piece, of course, is where possible, making sure you're getting some exercise and some quiet time. If you can't do that, don't feel like you're failing at taking care of yourself, but making sure that you have everything that you need to make sure that you're well resourced to take care of yourself and your family before taking care of your team and others. So the other piece I think it's maybe helpful to point out is that, again, this is really stressful and people's reserves are going to be quite low. So you have a duty of care to your employees and to your team, but you're not their therapist or their best friend or their parent or their financial advisor, unless, of course, maybe you work with family and you are related. But kind of unique circumstances aside, it's important that you do show care and concern and behave in a way that a good employer would, but you can redirect their questions and concerns in healthy ways if they're bringing stuff to you that maybe could be dealt with more appropriately in other forums. And you can set boundaries if you need to. So if someone is coming to you regularly in tears in response to something that has happened in their life as a part of this crisis, you can show care and concern and tell them that you care about them. But if they are looking for emotional support or looking for anything from you that you're uncomfortable providing as their manager or their employer, I would advise that you do set boundaries. You are allowed to set boundaries around the attention and the resources and the time that you give your team so that they can go to their family or to their health provider or to a counsellor or therapist to get that support. You don't have to be all things to all people. So be caring. It's stressful that you're in an employment relationship, show that you understand, but there is a limit, I guess, to what you can provide in an employment context, and redirecting those needs to places where they can be met is likely to be an important part of keeping yourself safe and making sure that you're not overextending yourself and caring for your team. Which leads us quite nicely into managing your team's well-being. So having said that, of course, there are things that as employers we would be advising our clients to do to make sure that they're meeting their duty of care to their team. So an extra helping of compassion and grace and patience at a time like this is going to be really appreciated. So stress levels are high, tempers are running short, people's heads are maybe not as present in the workspace as they might be because they're trying to get a generator because their power's out if they live in West Auckland. They're trying to contact family in Gisborne who they can't hear from yet. They've seen photos of devastation in towns that they used to live in or have loved ones in. There's obviously a lot that we're managing. So don't hold your team to the same standards of professionalism that you might normally. Basically, don't jump down someone's throat if they're a bit short or a bit upset. There's a lot going on right now, and those reactions are normal and not an indicator that they're being a dickhead at work. There's just a lot that we're dealing with and a lot that we're all managing. So if you're seeing people in tears or crying more often, that's a really normal reaction to the challenges we're facing. If people are getting really angry on short notice, I know that my temper is on a hair trigger when I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. If you're getting reduced communication from people, if people feel a bit disconnected or they're not kind of engaging with you in a way that they normally would, those are all super normal signs of emotional distress. And while it's normal, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage and ask and see if there's anything we can do to help from an employment perspective. So if you have EAP support, again, direct your team towards contacting the EAP provider. And if there isn't EAP support, that can be okay. But do just check in and see how people are going. And if there are resources that you're aware of that maybe they haven't accessed, like the helplines we'll talk about at the end of this session, direct them there, remind them to go and talk to their GP, where there are things that you can do as an employer to make life a bit easier. So if that's delaying a project that's not super critical or agreeing to kind of flexible working times and hours, there are things that we can do in our role as managers and employers to make life a bit easier. So team wellbeing is important within the scope of what's kind of appropriate to provide from the employment relationship perspective. Next, we'll jump into an overview of your employment obligations. And this is something that's quite important to talk about because when the pandemic hit, and it feels like, again, about 1 million years ago, but it was only 2 and 3, there was a widespread frustration amongst our clients, certainly, that the standard to which they were being held in terms of managing their teams and their business had not significantly changed. We're not here to argue the rights or the wrongs of the fact that that was the case, but certainly the law remains the law, and we still need to conduct ourselves and to manage our teams in accordance with the law. There is certainly extenuating circumstances that will affect what is considered fair and reasonable when dealing with our teams and with our businesses. But we still have to be fair and reasonable, and there are still some really key employment obligations that we can't skip when dealing with these or responding to these crises. So at a really, really high level, the first obligation that you always have as an employer is to act in good faith. It's written into the law. It's been upheld in every single ruling that I've ever read. And this means that you need to do things like communicate proactively with your team. So it comes back to the point I made earlier around reaching out kind of with communications. You're never going to get like a fine or a penalty for not doing that. But in terms of being proactive and communicative, that's something to be mindful of. This also means don't be a dick in your employment relationship. If you are feeling really frustrated, don't take it out on your team. If your tolerance for people's kind of hassles or dramas is lower, that's totally understandable. But again, don't take it out on them. Kind of name that if it's appropriate for you in your context. You're welcome to say, look, I'm on a really short fuse this week. I'm going to be a bit shorter and a bit more focused or a bit less friendly than I normally am. That's not a you problem. That's just me managing my energy levels, given that I'm trying to get the retail store cleaned up so we can open on the weekend or whatever the situation is. And remember too that you are in an employment relationship with your employees. So make sure that you are engaging with them as people, thinking about your relationship with them when you're making decisions or moving things around, and certainly making sure that any choices or decisions you make are fair and reasonable. Again, that is assessed in the context of, our third ever national emergency and all of the damage and disruption that we're experiencing, but you still must be fair and reasonable. You can't just leap to the most extreme choices that you might want to make, even if that would be most convenient for you right now. So the second, specific thing to point out is that if you are wanting to make changes to people's terms and conditions of employment, and by that I mean their location of work, their pay, their hours, their entitlements around annual leave and sick leave, that's all protected as it is normally. So you can't say to someone on a random Wednesday, hey, I'm going to cut your hours from 30 to 20 starting next week. That's illegal. You can't do that. And it's the same in these circumstances. So all of your employees' terms and conditions are protected, and any changes that you want to make, except in very specific circumstances, you will need to consult with your employees before making those changes. Now, a quick word on consultation. So consulting with your employees doesn't mean that you need to get them to agree with you. Consultation is not mutual agreement. Consultation is saying, here is the world as it is now. Here are your hours and your pay and the location of work. I'm proposing to make some changes, and that might be for the next month, the next 3 months, or permanently. And those changes are changing your hours from 30 to 20, or increasing them from 25 to 40, whatever the deal is. Or I'm proposing that your pay is reduced because we're going to be trading less over the next few months. Whatever it is, I'm proposing that to you. And here are the reasons why I'm proposing that. Here's the context, here's what I'm dealing with. And then that goes to your employees, and they get a fair and reasonable time to think about it and come back to you with their feedback. Their feedback might be, totally understand, no worries, boss. Extreme circumstances call for extreme responses. That's all super cool. I'm down with that. Their feedback might be, how dare you? Like, this is the worst time to be thinking about cutting my hours and my pay, and this is terrible, and you're a terrible person for proposing this. Whatever their feedback is, usually it's somewhere in the middle, you need to then consider it and think about their feedback and then make a decision that's fair and reasonable. So you'll note that if they disagree with you, you can still go ahead and do the thing that you want to do, as long as it's fair and reasonable, as long as you've explained what it is you're proposing to do and why you're proposing to do it, and then you've heard their feedback and thought about what they had to say. So that is a legal requirement written in law and upheld again by every ruling I've ever read. So you cannot shortcut that process, even in circumstances where you've been rained out and can't open for 2 weeks. You must go through that consultation piece. So if you're a MyHR client and you are considering making changes to your employees' T's and C's, please get in touch. It's a part of your monthly subscription to us that we will support you with those processes. We're very good at it, especially after the last 3 years with all the changes going on. So get in touch. We're here to help. Don't trip over anything because you didn't want to give us a call. So having talked about your employment obligations and having specifically talked about the need to consult if you're changing people's terms and conditions, let's jump into some specific scenarios that you might be managing. And once we've talked through those, we'll then have some time for questions. So if there's anything I've said that you want to understand more, or anything that you're dealing with that we haven't addressed today, again, there'll be time for questions. So start writing them down if you want to, or in 5 or 10 minutes, you can put them in as well. That's all totally cool. So in a situation where your operations or your business or your site has been so damaged by the cyclone that you will not be able to continue to run the business. Firstly, I'm obviously so sorry that has happened. It's incredibly difficult to have built something and worked on a business to have it stripped away in an extreme weather event. So if those are your circumstances, I'm really sorry for what you're going to have to be dealing with. But in terms of managing your employees, in the situation where you are going to lock the door, turn out the lights and walk away, like the business is over, if you have a force majeure clause in your employment agreements, you can, the analogy I want to use is bring the guillotine down, but that's far too morbid for this morning. You can just end the employment relationship if your terms and conditions allow you to do that. So if you're in a position, again, where you're closing the business, check your employment agreements. If you have a force majeure clause in there, and if it says what it needs to say, you will be able to end the employment relationships you have without going through that consultation process, because the circumstances are so extreme and because you have a clause in your employment agreement that allows you to do that. So check that as a first step. If you don't have a force majeure clause, even if your building's been wrecked by the weather and by the flooding, you will need to consult with your employees about ending their employment. That can be enormously frustrating and feel like pissing in the wind a bit, because obviously your building's not there, and so how can you run a business? But your employment obligations remain the same to consult. So if you don't have that force majeure clause, seek expert advice so that you can go through that consultation process and not end up fielding personal grievances when you have no business and you've got far bigger things on your plate to deal with. So the next one is where we tend to get the most questions and the most confusion around what employment obligations are. And this is where your organization or business can't open temporarily. So whether it's for a couple of days, whether it's for a week or a couple of months, there need to be some repairs done, perhaps, and maybe the building needs to be, rejibbed and recarpeted or repainted and all that noise. But you will be able to open again. You just can't right now. So in those circumstances, force majeure does not apply. So if you want to say, look, my restaurant's been flooded, I'm not going to be able to open for a month, I can't keep all of my kitchen staff and all my front of house and my wait staff on the payroll, can I just use force majeure to end those employment relationships and then restart again in a month? You can't do that. That's not what force majeure is about. You do have other options, but force majeure is not one of them if it's only a temporary disruption to your operations. So where you can't open temporarily, if your employees have the ability to work from home and can do so, hopefully it would be obvious that you can just do that. So in my world, because I don't have to be at a kitchen or at a job site or in a hospital, I can work from home. If you can do this, work from home, set up whatever their plans are, communicate with your employees, pay them normally, kind of business continues, just not everyone's in the office or on site all the time at the moment. Alternatively, if you have a shift cancellation clause in your employment agreement, this is much more common for trades and hospitality, then make sure to give your employees the notice in the shift cancellation clause, but you can use this for at least a few days just to kind of cancel the work that they had. But again, check that it is in their employment agreements. Make sure you are giving them the appropriate amount of notice, normally between 2 to 6 hours, and you won't be able to use this for a month, but you can use it for a few days if you just need to get in and clean things up and then open back up again. Alternatively, if there is just a temporary closure and you'll be able to open again, if you're in a position to do so, you can choose to just continue to pay your people for the few days you'll be shut as a gesture of good faith. It's unusual to find very many businesses right now who have that kind of cash flow and have that financial the financial resources to do it. But if it's just a day or two, you're maybe not in hospitality or retail where you're used to kind of shimmying people around, you can just choose to pay your team. If none of those options are available, so you can't work from home or have other working arrangements, you don't have a shift cancellation clause, and you don't have the resources to just pay your people, you can run a consultation process with your employees to do something like just put them on unpaid leave while the site or the office or the building is repaired, or potentially they can choose to use annual leave, again, if they have annual leave available, and if you have the cash flow to pay it while you're not trading. So if you need to not pay your people for a period of time, you can get there by going through a consultation process to say, here's what I want to do and why I want to do it. What do you guys think? Do you have any other suggestions? Okay, I'm confirming that you're all on unpaid leave for a week while we fix the driveway so that we can all get back down to the factory. So assuming if you're in the circumstances where you are open, your building hasn't been damaged, it's kind of business as usual for you, but your team can't come to work because they have no road to get out of Pauanui and the Coromandel, or because they've had they rely on public transport and the trains were cancelled, or whatever the situation is. Again, if they can work remotely, then just arrange that, make sure they've got the right equipment. If they can't work remotely, then you can offer them the choice of annual leave or unpaid leave to cover their time away. And another suggestion would be if there is the option for them to make up the hours later in the week or in the pay period, which might be a fortnight or a month, then you can choose just to pay them as normal so that they can, pay their bills and put food on the table, and they'll just work a couple of extra weeks to make up the time because there's a day or two where they won't be able to come to work. So that's an option as well. Now, going then from team can't come to work to team won't come to work. So I'm sure many of you remember that when we were dealing with the pandemic, there were people who were immunocompromised or who felt really uncomfortable coming into an office or into a workspace with lots of people, especially in the early days. That's harder to manage because as an employer, you're saying doors are open, like driveways sealed, you've got the train to get here, you are choosing not to come to work. So we need to look at how we manage this. Again, if they can work remotely, discuss this with them, agree on a plan, kind of business as usual. If your employee can't work remotely and doesn't want to come into work, offer them the option again of annual leave or unpaid leave to manage their time away. And again, if there is the option for them to make up the hours later in the week or the fortnight or the month, you might agree with them just to continue paying them as normally, and they'll just work a few extra hours next week to cover the fact that they can't come in today because they're receiving a plumber or an insurance inspector at their house or whatever the deal might be. So regardless of the outcomes of managing your people, if they are feeling distressed, which many of us are, do remember to point them in the directions of support that's available. So we've got these listed along with contact details on the blog post we've put up, which I'll link in the chat. But there's the Need to Talk service, which is 24/7 trained counsellors on 1737. Lifeline and the Suicide Crisis Helpline for people who are in acute distress as well. There's Youthline for younger folk who want to reach out and talk to someone. Again, if you've got EAP in your business or your organisation, provide that to your people, and also direct individuals to go and talk to their primary health provider, so if it's a GP or a clinic, to get some support as well. So that's half an hour of me blasting through quite a bit of content, so thank you for bearing with. We've now got 15 or 20 minutes to go through and take questions. So if there is anything that you would like to ask or want to clarify, now's the time. I was informed earlier that our chat function was turned off. Apologies, that's a technical thing on our end, but the Q&A function is working. So if you have a question, pop it in Q&A. Just a reminder, it will be recorded and visible online. So if it's something that you don't want available in the public domain, then either make it anonymous or get in touch with me afterwards. So we've had a few questions come through. Bruce has asked, hi Bruce, thanks for joining us. Will we be open to any health and safety issues for sending employees into a dangerous area? The short answer is it depends, but yes, you are liable. So if you are what would be a good example? If you're an electrical firm and you have an electrician who's going to a commercial or residential site to check the lines, run cable, kind of repair whatever damage has been done, you and them have the same health and safety obligations to make sure it's a healthy and safe work site as you do under any conditions. So where there's a specific risk to manage on site, yes, you need to make sure that that risk is managed. As an example, in the MyHR office, we have a leak in the corner of the room that I'm sitting in. So we just let people know that there is a leak in the corner. It's not a hazard because you can't trip over it and the building's sound, but just in terms of flagging that to people, you just do that like you normally would. In circumstances where you are in a more involved level of responding to the challenges. So if you're, if you have a community organization who is helping people find food and resources and stuff, the same applies. You need to make sure that they are in a healthy and safe work environment as far as you can control. And if you can't guarantee that, you need to look really hard at whether you are justified in asking them to attend that site or to work in that environment. So one of the reasons it's taken so long to get the East Cape electricals and telecommunications back up online is that Transpower and the providers down there weren't able to guarantee their team's safety going in and looking at what had happened with the substations and the transformers down there. And so they said, until it's safe, we're not sending our teams in. So the short answer is yes, if you send employees into a dangerous area, you are subject to the same health and safety requirements as normal. So if you're not sure, really, really carefully assess whether it's a need to send them in and do that work, or if you can delay it. I would also suggest that you do engage some health and safety support if you don't have a health and safety manager to help understand your obligations there. Cool. Question that says, regarding paying staff who can't get in due to the road closure, we have paid those who can't get to work in the past. Is there anything that says we must pay because we have recently done this, or we can ask them to take leave and make up hours, as you mentioned? Tam, thanks for your question. That's totally fine. If you have paid employees in the past who haven't been able to come in, understandably, your team might be expecting that again this time. But as long as you make it clear what the circumstances are and say, hey, look, this has really shafted us, and what we're proposing to do is different from what we've done in the past. We're suggesting people take unpaid time or annual leave or make up hours instead, because we're not in a position where we can afford to pay 100% of our staff because they can't come to work. When it was one or two of them, it was okay, but we just can't manage that again. So as long as you communicate and make that clear, the fact that you've done that in the past doesn't mean you have to do it again, but just make sure people understand why, so that they don't feel like they're getting a raw deal this time. Anonymous asks, for the consultation process, can that be done in a group setting if it applies to many, particularly seeing as we are wanting to hold a consultation regarding pay for the Monday and Tuesday just gone. We're running payroll next week. This means we're time sensitive. That's a great question. So most employees in New Zealand are on individual employment agreements, which means that they have a right to be consulted with and engaged individually in circumstances that might affect their conditions. Having said that, it is totally appropriate to say, hey, everyone, here's what we're proposing. This affects everyone, or this affects this shift or this group of people or whatever it is. We wanted to let you all know as a team that this is what we're proposing. We are going to give you individual opportunities to come back to us with feedback, because the things that you want to say to us, you might not want to say in a group setting, totally fine. But we're just letting you know as a team, this is time sensitive. So here's what we're proposing to do. Please come back within this time frame. You can call me or email me with your feedback. We'll consider it and move forward. So the short answer is, I guess it's a bit nuanced, but you can certainly do some of your consultation in group settings, as long as people feel like they have a chance to get in touch privately if they want to. Most of the time, I would be really comfortable with that. Another question from Bruce. We sent 2 employees down to Gisborne prior to Gabrielle. We have had word that they are okay. I'm really glad that you've had that word. That's good news. All employees were told not to go into a work situation they were unsure of. However, of course, we had no idea of the devastation that was to come. Also, not being able to get an up-to-date picture as to what new hazards are at that site. What should we be doing as far as the job and our employees are concerned? That's a really excellent question, Bruce. And I think especially given how quickly the circumstances changed over the weekend, I think a lot of providers are going to be in that position. If you can't communicate with your employees, you are very, very limited in terms of being able to understand what's happening down there and help them respond. So as long as they have had adequate kind of health and safety training, if they have the I guess authority to choose not to go into a situation if it's not dangerous, like no one's gonna like shout at them for doing that. And as long as they had a clear directive, particularly before they went down, not to go into situations that were dangerous, I think that will cover most of your bases. But do make sure as soon as you can to get in touch with them to ask questions about what the sites are and what the hazards are. But if you're doing all you can, you can't do more than that. Do you know what I mean? So try and get in touch. It sounds like you set the expectation with them before they went down, not to mess around if something was unsafe. And yeah, just keep tabs on the situation and respond to it as soon as you can get in touch with them and understand what's going on. Cool. Taryn asks, when employees do not feel safe coming to work, could this be viewed as an unacceptable reason not to attend and potentially added to an ongoing disciplinary regarding absences? The short answer is potentially, but it really depends on the circumstance. If you've got an employee who you think is taking the piss and not coming in because they just can't be bothered and would rather be at home, you can investigate that carefully to understand what's happening for them and why they don't feel safe coming to work. At the other end of the spectrum, if you know that someone, what would be a good example? You basically need to take it on a case-by-case basis, I guess is the message. So if you know that someone was, in a car crash 12 months ago and that shook them up and was quite scary, and they now drive to work and their route to work kind of goes through areas that have been quite affected by flooding, or there was a bridge that they had to drive over that's kind of being assessed, and they're saying, look, I just don't feel safe coming to work. In those circumstances, I would really steer away from punishing them for telling you that. There's clearly context that makes it probable that they would genuinely be feeling unsafe coming to work. And also in the circumstances, clearly there are things that are affecting how safe they feel. So most of the time, I would say give people the benefit of the doubt in terms of trusting that they don't feel safe coming to work. You then want to jump to can they work from home? Are there other alternative working arrangements? Can they take unpaid or annual leave? But if you've got someone who you think is taking the piss, you can look into that. Just be careful and a bit mindful about how you do explore it. And if it's like, speaking frankly, sometimes we just get a bit allergic to people and a bit fed up with them. And so them doing something that someone else who we like and aren't fed up with, those people can do the same thing and it's fine for that person. But our reaction to this person is really elevated because we're just sick of them and we know that they're a knob. So in those circumstances, just be a bit careful that you're treating your employees fairly and reasonably, which includes kind of not witch hunting someone, but not coming down on a ton of bricks for someone when another of your employees is doing the same thing. So tread carefully, I guess would be my short response to that. Anonymous says, thanks for the info, much appreciated. Oh, you're welcome, Anonymous, no problem. 2 questions. Those who won't come to work, what are the options again on how to manage those who choose not to come to work for various reasons? The information's in our blog post, which I'll link in the chat before I close the webinar down. But in brief, they are, can they work from home or are there alternative work arrangements you can make? That's kind of first port of call. Second would be, can they take unpaid or annual leave for a period of time that they don't want to come to work? So just like managing anyone who wants to go away for a holiday or has a commitment. And the third would be seeing if there is a way for you to continue paying them for this week, for example, and they work 20 hours, not 40. And then next week they work 50 hours, not 40. And the week after they work 50 hours, not 40. So you get 20 hours, 50-50 rather than 40-40-40. I think that math works out, but you just pay them the same so that their finances kind of aren't interrupted and you can take things forward. Second question, consulting employees, even if they disagree with the change, as long as we give them reason and time to think through, we can go ahead with the change. For example, if we need to cut hours. In a nutshell, yes. So if you propose cutting hours and explain why, and your proposal to cut hours is reasonable, like it's based on stuff that you're actually trying to manage, like your cash flow and trading hours, all that kind of stuff, and you propose that to your team, they have time to think about it, they give you feedback, and you consider the feedback, yes, you can go ahead with that change, even if it's unpopular or they don't disagree. What's important is that you involve them in that decision-making process, not that they agree with the decision. We would never get anything done if we had to get everyone to agree with everything we wanted to do all the time. So what's important is that consultation piece. Anonymous says, really feeling the collective energy is low and we want to support our staff to do whatever is necessary for them to take care of themselves first and foremost. That said, it's feeling like it's going to be a long road out of this pandemic and disaster space in terms of well-being. Do you have any thoughts about how to sensitively address the need for balancing self-care as well as keeping on with the priorities of the business in the longer term? That's $1 million question, Anonymous. So thank you for submitting it. I love that you're thinking about kind of the longer term pathway out of this. There are some really well-established best practices for managing well-being in work, even just with business as usual. So the kind of core components would be make sure people's workloads are manageable, make sure their workspaces are safe and comfortable, make sure no one's being bullied, make sure they've got people they can talk to if they've got concerns. All of that kind of best practice stuff still applies. In terms of the disaster pandemic kind of space, I don't think there's any really well-charted set of recommendations I can give you because this is such a new space, particularly in New Zealand. But what I would say is the fact that you're thinking about your team's well-being and you want to give them space and permission to prioritize how they're doing, that is half the battle, especially when people feel like it's okay and it's safe to go, I'm just in a really shitty headspace today, boss. I just need to take a day off, lie on the couch, hang out with my kids and my dog, and then I'll come in tomorrow, but I really need some space today. Being able to do that and things like that are enormously powerful and compelling in terms of helping people feel like they can take care of themselves and not be thought of as being weak or being ashamed of needing to take time for them. In terms of balancing the priorities of the business, I think there are some really compelling strategic questions that we're all going to need to start asking around kind of like, what can we expect people to deliver having just gone through the pandemic and the kind of ongoing disaster zone that has been the last 4 or 5 years. And if you can afford to bring more people in to spread the load, that might be something you can choose to do. If you choose to just scale back your ambitions or scale back your business priorities, that might be something else to consider. I think my gut instinct is there will be it will never be possible to have perfect balance between your well-being on one side and your business priorities on the other, but trying to find the balance is what's going to make the most impact for your team and therefore what they can deliver for your business or your organization in the long run. So kia kaha, I guess, is the message. I really support that instinct for thinking about the team's well-being and how it can be managed and balanced. And there will be things that we can do that make a difference, but it's really stressful out there and it's really tough. Cost of living, there are so many things that have made it really hard to be well in the last few years. I don't think any one person has all the answers. So you certainly can't fail and you won't be able to get it perfect, but I think trying is what's going to make the biggest difference in the long term. So on that hopefully positive and empowering last comment from me, we've come to the end of our questions and we're at 1:45, so we're about bang on for time. So to our participants today, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found some content in there that was helpful and meaningful to you. I will switch my video off and then pop the link into our blog, which had some of those specific examples I talked about for those scenarios. And if there is anything you would like to understand more, you can get in touch with me. I'm Sylvie, Sylvie, myhr.works. I'll put that email in the chat as well. And the video recording will be available afterwards, as I mentioned earlier, so you can come back and watch sections if you need to. So thank you again. I hope you have a safe, sunny afternoon wherever you are, and take care of yourself and someone else if you can. And we'll see you next time. Ka kite.